So, welcome back in our part two of a chapter Monopolistic Competition and Oligopoly. So, in the second part, we focus on oligopoly type of market and see that how we can explain the oligopoly. Scale economies may make it unprofitable, like when there are certain industries in which you need to produce on a very large scale in order to reach to the capacity or reach to the point where the economies of scale is achieved, is unprofitable for more than few firms to coexist in the market. So in that type of market, only few firms exist. Patents or access to a technology may exclude potential competitors, and the need to spend money for name recognition and market reputation may discourage entry by new firms. So these are natural entry barriers, and they are basic to the structure of a particular market. In addition, incumbent firm may take strategic actions to deter entry, like those who are already in the market, so they take actions in such a way that new firms cannot enter. You can imagine, like as we were discussing the same market again and again, like a soft drink market. So major players in that market is Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And we see from a very long time that these two are the competitors. So because they have millions of dollars to invest in their advertisement campaigns, sponsoring different events, sports events, and all these things, so no new firm can compete with them at this level. So that's the way that they create a oligopoly type of market. Managing an oligopolistic firm is a complicated. Now, what's the difference between an oligopoly and a monopolistic competition? Oligopoly, because there are very few players in the market, so the action of one player is very important for the other player, or it creates an effect. So the action of one player in that market has an impact on the other players, very significant. So complicated because pricing, like setting a price by one competitor, affect the others. Quantity, output. So these are all advertising and investment decisions involve important strategic considerations, so which can be highly complex. So in this particular type of market, the firms has to think strategically. Now, when we are saying think strategically, it means that they have to not only take care of their own revenue or the cost or a marginal revenue or a marginal cost, but they have to keep it in mind the output, the prices, the investment, or how the competitors are behaving. All these things in their mind. So they have to take actions, keeping in mind the actions of the competitors, because this is a market in which very few firms capturing major shares in the market. So a big firm in a market, when they take action, so that has an impact, a significant impact on the other. So in an oligopolist, now how we can achieve an equilibrium in the market? We see equilibrium in a competitive market. We see equilibrium in our monopolistic competition and also in monopoly. But how equilibrium is achieved or is established in a oligopoly type of market? In an oligopolistic market, however, a firm sets price or output based partly on a strategic consideration, like how much, at what price my competitor is selling, regarding the behavior of its competitors. With some modification, the underlying principle to describe an equilibrium when firms make decisions that explicitly take each other's behavior into account is the same as the equilibrium in a competitive and monopolistic market. So when the market is in equilibrium, firms are doing the best they can and have no reason to change their price or output. Now, this type of, which we call it as a strategic decision making, there is a concept introduced by Nash, an economist come mathematician, and that's why we call it as a Nash equilibrium. So Nash equilibrium, set of strategies or actions in which each firm does the best it can, given its competitors' action. So they are doing their best. Keep it in mind the what is the action, or you can say the reaction of my competitors. So Nash equilibrium, each firm is doing the best it can given what the competitors are doing. Given what the competitors are doing. So that's the way we can define Nash equilibrium. For example, like let's discuss a duopoly market. Duopoly means the market with only two players. So market in which two firms compete with each other. And we are also discussing a very specific model, and we call it as a Cournot model. So Cournot model in an oligopoly market in which firms produce a homogeneous product, means the products are identical. So there is no product differentiation. So it means that it's a market like a competitive market with a homogeneous product. But as the number of firms are only two, like we discussed duopoly, so it is not a competitive market, because in a competitive market the firms should be many. But here we are assuming the products are identical or homogeneous, but the players or the firms are only two. So each firms treat the output of its competitors as fixed. We decide the output by taking the firm's output as given and fixed. It's not changing. It's not dynamic. And all firms decide simultaneously, like they are deciding at the same moment, not one after the other. If the firms are deciding the actions at the same time, we call it as a simultaneous movement. When they are deciding one after the other, we call it as a that's not a simultaneous, but it's a one after the other, or first mover advantage, in which the first taking the first action and the other one is taking the action later. And we describe this with the other way. So how much to produce? Now, if, for example, here we are talking about a firm 1 and firm 2, because it's a duopoly. So firms 1's profit maximizing output depends on how much it thinks that firms 2 will produce. So the total overall demand, if the firm 2 is producing zero output, so whatever the demand for the market is demand for the firm 1, because firm 2 is producing zero. So we represented here this by D1, and in parentheses we write 0. It means that the firm 2 is producing 0. In this case, this is our demand curve, and this one is our marginal revenue curve, and the firm is going to decide where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. This is the point. So it means if the firm 2 is producing 0, the firm 1 is going to produce 50 units. You see where? Why? Because it's a marginal revenue and marginal cost equate here. So we decide that the firm 1 is going to produce 50 units. So if it thinks that firm 2 will produce nothing, the demand curve labeled D0 is the market demand curve. The corresponding marginal revenue curve labeled as MR10 intersect firm's marginal cost curve MC at an output of 50 units. If firm 1 thinks that the firm 2 will produce 50 units, so its demand curve is going to shift inside, because the demand is going to reduce by 50 units by this amount. So profit maximizing, now the new demand curve is this for firm 1. So D1, and in parentheses we write 50. It means what we are saying, that the firm 2 is producing 50 units. In that case, the marginal revenue curve is this, which is MR1 against the 50 units produced by the firm 2. So we decide that this is that point we have to produce those. So the firm 1 is going to produce 25 units, right? So that's the way that we decide 25 units. Finally, if firm 1 thinks that the firm 2 is going to produce 75 units, the firm will produce 12.5. In a similar way, the demand reduce, the marginal revenue curve intersect the marginal cost curve at a 12.5. So you see that as the firm 2 is producing more and more, firm 1 is producing less and less in order to maximize their profit, and profit maximizing is where the MR is equal to MC. Now with this way, we can develop a reaction curves for both the firms. So how we can drive the reaction firms? So in this case, we are not plotting the price on y-axis, but what we are plotting here on y-axis, we are plotting the output of firm 1, and on x-axis we are plotting the output of firm 2. And we see here that if how much they're gonna produce if the other firm is producing this much. So firm 1's reaction curve shows how much it will produce as a function of how much it thinks firm 2 will produce. So we can say that Sx at Q2 is equal to 0, 50 and 75 corresponding to the examples in our figure 12.3. So we see here this one is a reaction function for firm 1. So when the firm 2 is producing 0, so firm 1 is producing 50, and when the firm 2 is producing 25, 50, so we produce 25, and then with 75 we see 12.5. So this line or this curve is a reaction curve, and we just discussed in our the previous slide that this, and the other one is a reaction curve for firm 2, the firm's 2's reaction curve. Now where they are intersecting each other, this one we call it as a equilibrium, and we specifically we call it as a Cournot equilibrium. So in a Cournot equilibrium, each firm's produce correctly assume the amount that its competitor will produce and thereby maximize its own profit. Therefore, neither firm will move from this equilibrium. So this is the point where the profit is maximizing given the other firms is how much is producing. So for that reason, we are saying that it's an equilibrium. Now, Cournot equilibrium is a Cournot model in which each firm correctly assumes how much its competitors will produce and set its own production level accordingly. So Cournot equilibrium is an example of a Nash equilibrium, and for that reason sometimes we also call it as a Cournot-Nash equilibrium. In a Nash equilibrium, each firm is doing the best it can given what its competitors are doing. So as a result, no firm would individually want to change its behavior. In the Cournot equilibrium, each firm is producing an amount that maximizes its profit given that its competitors is producing. So neither would change its output in the Cournot equilibrium. So here is an example like in real sense. We find out the equations for reaction curves, and then we also determine that if they are what is a Cournot equilibrium quantity, if they're cooperating or collude with each other, what will be their, how much they're going to produce, and if they compete, then how much they're going to produce. So we are assuming that this is our demand function for the whole market, and the marginal cost, we are also assuming that the marginal cost of producing the product is 0. And we know that there are many products in which there is a possible, especially the digital ones, like a book or download or a song or a video download, the marginal costs are approximately 0. So total revenue for the firm for the two firms is R1. If we want to find out R1, how we can calculate it? So what we can do is R1, we multiply this P into Q1. If you multiply this P with a Q1, so what we did, we multiply this P with a Q1, right? Because this is a revenue R1. Now P is 30 minus Q. This one is P as per this equation, demand equation, and Q1 is right in it. So if you solve this equation, you can see 30 Q1 minus Q1 square, right? And minus Q1 Q2. So this is the way that it works, because this is, we solve it. We solve this 30 Q1 minus Q1 square minus, because this is a total revenue for the firm. So now if we take a marginal because this one is Q1, right? It's total Q, sorry, it's Q. So we can write it Q as a Q1 plus Q2, right? and then you solve it, then you can get it this one. So this Q is not Q1. So 30 minus Q into Q1, and this Q1 is Q is replaced by Q1 plus Q2 because the two firms are there, and then we open up, we get this one. Now with this one we can this one is the total revenue, so we can take out the minor revenue when we derivate this delta R1 with respect to delta Q1. So we get this is our minor revenue for firm 1, MR1, minor revenue for firm 1. Marginal cost is 0. Setting minor revenue is equal to 0 because marginal cost we already assume that it is 0. So when we set this one is equal to 0 and solve it, so we get it Q1, the quantity how much this firm 1 has to produce is 15 minus 1 by 2 Q2. Solving just this solving equal to 0. If you solve it Q1, you will get this one. So this is a reaction equation for a reaction curve for firm 1. On the similar grounds, we can find out the reaction curve for firm 2 as well, and this one is very similar. There is no difference like Q2, but this one is Q1, so you have to be careful like this one Q1. Now how we can find out that each should, if the marginal cost is same and the minor revenue is same, so it means they're going to produce the equal quantity, and you can solve it like where Q1 is equal to Q2. So if you equate this into this, we get it like 10, because if Q1 is equal to Q2, so you can place it Q1 here and solve it for Q1, so you can get it like 10 each. So Cournot equilibrium is that each firm is going to produce 10 and the total output is going to be 20. So 10 each, and by this way their profit is maximized. We can represent it like the linear demand curve. So if the two firms collude, like there is a possibility because there are two, they say collude, we join together, and if they join together, then how much they're going to produce. So the PR, the R is P into Q, so we write it Q is, this one is Q 30Q minus Q square, and when you take, so 30 minus 2Q, and we equate it with the 0 and solve it, we see that the quantity should be 15 if they collude to maximize their profit, and in this case they can divide this with a 7.5. Now when we draw these curves, and these curves, this diagram is very effective to understand this whole idea. Now we get this curve by the reaction equation of the firm 1, and we get this curve, this one is by the reaction curve of the firm 2, like if you go there, this is firm 2, and by this way we get this equilibrium, and this is what we call it as a Cournot equilibrium. And Cournot equilibrium is saying that each firm is going to produce 10, right? And if they collude, we just discussed that if they collude, so the collusion curve is this green line, and they're going to produce 7.5 and 7.5. But if it is a competitive market, now if this is a competitive market and the marginal cost is 0, so we equate this with a 0. So 0, 30 minus Q, so Q is equal to 30, right? So we're going to produce 30. 30 means 15 each. This is 15, so there is a typo here as well. So 15 each, and that's what we call it as a competitive equilibrium. So you can see here, this is a monopoly equilibrium because they collude each other. This is a duopoly equilibrium with the given or Cournot equilibrium with the given output of the other firm, and this one is a competitive equilibrium. So we can see very easily that the monopoly equilibrium is the lowest output and the highest price they can charge. The Cournot equilibrium is in between these two, like a competitive market and the monopoly. Now, as I mentioned that there is another model and that's called as a Stackelberg model. in which there is a sequential games, means that the actions are not simultaneous, right? And as I mentioned at that point, first mover advantage, and that particular model is called as a Stackelberg model. Stackelberg model, oligopoly model in which one firm sets its output before other firm. So it means it is a known fact for the other firm that how much the other is going to produce, because the first one is sequentially, they are playing sequentially, and the first sequence wise the first firms declare or open or reveal how much they are producing, and by this way the other is deciding how much we have to produce. So oligopoly, and that model is called the Stackelberg model. So we first discussed the Cournot model in which the firms are simultaneously deciding. Now in the second model, which is the Stackelberg model, in which the firms are deciding sequentially. Suppose a firm set its output, and then firm 2, after observing firm's output, makes its output decision. In setting output, firm 1 must therefore consider how much firm 2 will react. So we see here, this is our function, and this is our second reaction function, the firm's revenue we see here. So 30 Q1 minus Q1 square minus Q2 Q1, and we plug in the 2's output as a reaction function, plug in here, and then we solve it. The minor revenue is 15 minus Q1. So MR is equal to 0 given Q1 is equal to 15 and Q2 is 7.5. So this one is a Q2. So we conclude that firm 1 produced twice as much as firm 2 and makes twice as much profit. Going first gives firm an advantage. So because the firm 1 is deciding first, we are assuming, right? So if we are assuming that the firm 1 is deciding, so firm is deciding according to his own profit maximizing, and by this way the firm 1 selects 15. Now firm 1 selects 15, now firm 2 has no option but take that 15 as a given, and then they decided, and by this way they decided, okay, I'm going to produce 7.5, and by this way they can see that. And this model is called as a Stackelberg model. So we discussed two models. One is a simultaneous solution and the other one is a sequential decision. So this is all what I want to discuss in this chapter regarding the oligopoly. And in oligopoly we discuss Nash equilibrium, Cournot equilibrium, and Stackelberg model equilibrium. So let's see you in part 3.